Thank you for your patience. We had a little bit of technical difficulties there, but everything seems to be going well. As usual, we'll give just a couple minutes for any Zoom attendees to log in, and then we'll get started. Okay. I call this workshop of the South Liberty School District to order. We'll move on first to our land acknowledgement. Director Jackson.
Thank you, Brooke. We gather today on Indigenous land that is Indigenous through uncountable generations of people of the Coast Salish, Snohomish, Stillaguamish, Suquamish, and Swinomish tribes, people collectively affiliated with the Tulalip tribes, people for whom generations of ancestors have tended this space and continue to tend these spaces and have had a sacred connection with these lands and these waters. We acknowledge the sacred ties between Indigenous people and the land, and the ties that we all share through the sharing of place and through the sharing of an agreement signed into treaty at the Point of Mukilteo in 1855. For those gathered today or watching online, I'd like to draw your attention to several upcoming opportunities for learning and sharing community. Tomorrow at the Pacific Rim Institute in Coupeville, there's a storyteller, Lou LaBombard, a member of the Seneca, Mohawk, Iroquois, Wolf, and Snipe clans. He'll be sharing stories around the fire. It's a free and family-friendly event offered in partnership with the Penn Cove Water Festival Association. There's also an extraordinary bloom of blue camas at Pacific Rim Institute right now, so it's a great season to visit. And on the weekend of the 19th, 20th, and 21st of May, there is a powwow, the All My Relations powwow being offered at the Skagit Valley College. So I encourage for those who subscribe to the district's Peach Jar flyer notifications, you can see the flyer there and learn more. It's also being shared on screen by Ms. Macaro. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just a quick reminder on our public comment discussion, and a note that at the end of this meeting, the board will be going into executive session to discuss the review the performance of a public employee for approximately 1 hour. This is a board workshop, and so we encourage the community members who are here with us at the meeting and those who are with us online on the Zoom meeting to join in the conversation. We want your comments, your feedback, all of that. The first time, if you are in person, if you have something, please just raise a hand or something so we can get you a mic so those who are online can hear. If you are online, please use the Q&A function and just note your name and location so that I know that you have something to say, and then you can start typing what you actually want to say, and I will read it into the record, as it were. If you are online, please be full, complete thoughts rather than just like, I agree with what was said, because it's liable that we'll be 2 or 3 comments down the road by that time. So please do try to be as complete as possible. The first time you speak, whether you're in person or online, please state your name and location, just so we have it for our public comment records. And just a reminder, we'll be discussing some of this later on in the meeting, but a reminder that the expectation and demand of public comment at a school board meeting is that If you have criticism, it will attack an idea or an action. It will not attack a person. Yeah, we'll move on to our presentation today. And I will first turn it over to Dr. Moshe.
Thank you. This is the culmination of work that's gone on all year. Very well led by Kayla Phillips, who is our curriculum leader as well as principal of our middle school. And she's worked with a team. And that team is presenting for the board's discussion tonight, potential adoption for our ELA curriculum. So I just want to give a big shout out to Kayla and the team for all the work they've done to get to this point. And tonight is the opportunity for all the board's questions and any questions from the community. And you can see on the table back there all of the materials that are being talked about in the 58 slides. So
Working on it.
take it away, Kayla and team.
Thank you. Yep, I will try to keep this condensed, but there's so much information over the last 16 months that is hard to put into slides and emails that I've sent to you ahead of time. So I apologize. And I also sent ahead of time a little bit of acronym debriefing. So I'll try my best to introduce it prior to, but also I might fall into that just for brevity's sake or repetition. So. We're going to go in reverse. I know we're looking at K-12. We're actually going to start at the secondary level. So I worked with 2 teams from February 2022 until we're going to keep going. But the 7-12 team, we're going to talk about first. So if you peruse back there at all, you looked at more novel-based information. Board members got a sample of our novel adoption rubric, and then we'll look at what K-6 is up to. Our team. I have one with me tonight, myself, Kayla Phillips, Jennifer Gandarius teaches at the high school. She's going to talk about a few slides. Rosie Donnelly and Christine Reed teach English. Kyla Stelling is our ethnic studies teacher, and she was Lens of Equity for us. Patty Maddox is in special education and represented from that angle. Justin Silva and Lindsay Richards teach a variety of content and hold endorsements in multiple fields. And so they looked at our rubric, cross content development, and then Sue Ann Brewer, our tech TOSA. So tried to pull from multiple sources. And then of course, any student that got to be one of these classes to pilot with us. This is a quote we have shared together since 2021, I want to say. And it was in 1988, it was originated and then developed into this. And it's been a theme of our why. So we really want to highlight the why or the focus we've tried to keep in mind as we look at materials and think about our students and what we bring to our classrooms. Books are sometimes windows offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through the imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our lives and experiences as part of a larger human experience. Reading them becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. So we looked at, when we're looking at materials, what does it offer to any of our students, whether it's a mirror, a window, or a door? So that's a lot of our theme to what we were looking at when we looked at materials. Overview in the 7-12 of what we're going to look at today, our timeline, our needs assessment, which was done by any ELA teacher. We have a textbook that we are looking at, instructional resources. So this is kind of a snapshot to keep us on track, because I know on time.
Real quick, will this slideshow will be available in the agenda after the meeting?
Correct.
Thank you.
So our timeline overview to get a snapshot of what we as a team have done. So in the spring of 2022, actually more realistically, March, we sent out a needs assessment to any teacher who has touched ELA in the building 7 through 12. So we conducted a needs assessment. Then we looked at non-negotiables that will kind of be thematic throughout the process. We looked at our technology and our inventory. What do we have right now, and what are our needs based off of where we want to go moving forward? We spent some time together in the summer. We looked at some curriculum that we decided to pilot. We looked at potential opportunities for pilots. We started looking at novel studies. And by that, what I mean is teachers started to look at books, and they spent I don't even know the number of hours reading novels to decide the appropriateness for their classroom or another grade level's classroom. Our instructional deep dive, which we'll look at more, and then our scope and sequence, which has been the biggest amount of our time spent together. First semester, we did some piloting, especially in the 10-12 classroom with a more traditional textbook. Scope and sequence continued on. We've got some great technology, which I talked about in our SIP a couple times, and we'll come back to that today. And then we implemented some really great knowledge that we found in a lot of our instructional reading. Second semester, pretty similar. Started getting more more books into students' hands, looking and narrowing our novel selection, looking at the textbooks and the feedback from semester 1, some data, and then continuation of that scope and sequence. So I know on one piece of paper, it looks great and it looks nice and condensed, but these are hours and hours of work done by the entire team. The amount of novels that they must have read in the last year and a half is over the top. All right, so when we did our needs assessment, we came to the conclusion of some non-negotiables we were looking for. We wanted a universal novel selection process. Despite our own personal feelings or beliefs that we have, we wanted to figure out, thinking about ourselves in the seat we're in and the person that's going to take that and how they're going to be able to access what we have as materials. We want to look at the technology and accessibility to what we're handing to students and making sure it's more equitable. Looking at our scope and sequence in alignment to the Common Core State Standards. So when you see CCSS, it stands for Common Core State Standards. An alignment to cross curricular content. So what's happening in ethnic studies and how can that be mirrored in 9th grade English? Same with social studies and other courses. And of course, alignment to mission and goals. 10th and 12th grade was identified as needing some updated textbooks. And then instructional materials and professional growth, culturally responsive, student-centered instruction. So that was thematically what our goals were as a team. This came from Joe a couple weeks ago. Why did we rule out a traditional comprehensive curriculum? So kind of that boxed curriculum. So based off the needs assessment and then what we think our student needs are, and then Ed Reports is a great free website that is a third-party analysis of curriculum. And we didn't see, based off of our needs, our students, or our input, that we needed a full overhaul of what we had. The needs assessment, this is from all teachers and their interest in what we were looking for. So based off of their input, we were able to narrow those non-negotiables to what we've been working on. So the pilot for textbooks, we've worked with a company called W.W. Norton. So we reached out to them, and I've linked some of their equity-minded DEI practices in it because that was what we were initially drawn to. So we initiated Uncharted Territory, which is could be used in 10th or 12th grade, which we liked that one textbook bot could serve in 2 grade levels, and then a 12th grade level at the AP course. AP course, students took it the last 2 weeks. Those courses come out in July, so that'll be a measure for us, but we don't have access to yet. So why did we pick it? Met components in the needs assessment, their DEI and their equity-minded teaching practices, alignment to Common Core State Standards, and then the digital access with a lot of tools for modifications and access in audio, for example, is a huge component for us to think about how we're 21st century learners and the accessibility that we can offer to them that they might experience in their post-high school graduation. What did we find when we did this? Uncharted Territory, the 10th and 12th grade one, it was only piloted in the 10th grade course. The team has looked through it and found the accessibility at 12th grade level is still relevant. They found the stories rigorous, rich in opportunities, targeting a lot of skill that you would want to look for in 10th and 12th grade ELA classrooms, in-text citations, analysis, critical thinking. It balances within our scope and sequence. It was a bit clunky at times with the online access. That just is something we need time in to just get more comfortable in and figure out how to help students access it and maximize that, as well as teachers. 12th grade one, a variety of critical thinking and analysis offered with diverse and unique stories aligned to our scope and sequence. Students found them engaging, well-rounded. Again, pretty clunky online initially. We felt that over time it was more user error and not so much the platform, but just our ability to find time to go through it and figure out how we can cater to our personal needs. Working with this publisher, they're a pretty small company. So we found that they go above and beyond in accessibility. Their personalized approach to programs, they've learned a lot about South Whidbey. We've spent a lot of time together talking about our needs assessment, what our teachers are looking for, and then they've really worked to help us find what we can maximize for our dollar. their DEI and equity work. There's a link there to one of their podcasts. And then we felt the cost is affordability was pretty accessible for us, as well as the flexibility in contracts. And then if we want some, hard text versus online accessibility, they're very personalized. So we've enjoyed working with them. This is going to be Mrs. Gandarius.
So I would like to say that I was piloting a little bit of the uncharted territories in the last slide. It's a nonfiction text, really modern, interesting, engaging. I think students will like that, whereas sometimes news articles and things they're not so interested in. Okay, one of the things that we really want to focus on is we are eventually going to have to hire some new teachers, and we also want to be uniting with the middle school and the high school together on our philosophy of education. And so we have kind of developed a library that is based on our philosophy of practices, and it's to help assist us so we can be unified as teachers, but also any new teachers coming into the district then will be able to house our institutional knowledge and beliefs. We start a few things here. Jennifer Fletcher's book by Teaching Lit Rhetorically, the Penny Kittle book, let's just say anything by Penny Kittle, we love. You see her on there twice. Book Love was the first book I loved when I met her at NCTE, and it really talks about regaining student infatuation with books. And we have a lot of students that are not interested in reading. And then you have the Odell book there. It's a mentor textbook. Read-A-Side is kind of thrown in there. It's about how schools are killing the love of reading. It's light and wonderful, actually. It's very good. So we would recommend all of these, but we felt like that gave us a good guide for where we want to go as a staff, how we want to work, and what our beliefs are with teaching students how to read, write, think critically, and speak. And we wanted to be united all of those grade levels. So that's that. Okay, implementation. So we have spent a lot of time making sure that we are reading and deep diving into all of the practices that we find that fit our needs and our students' needs. We continue to pilot. We're not done yet. In fact, a couple of students here are going to be looking at books in the next week. We are still in dialogue, and as we are trying new things out, we're talking about what works and doesn't, looking at that sequencing of learning from 6th grade to 12th grade and sharing all the techniques that work in different grade levels and in different formats. Our goal, as I said before, is to create that library so that any teacher coming in would have access to kind of our thought process and why we do things the way we do. So that's why that started up there again. And our goal is to be completely united in culturally responsive teaching practices, UDL, and let's just talk about joy. A lot of the things that we read sometimes are not heartwarming. But so we have to deal with some difficult content, but also we want to make sure that we are giving kids an opportunity to express joy in reading and the content that they're reading. Okay, so this slide down here, I think is most important. Oh, can you get there? The reading, writing, thinking, of course, but go down to the bottom. We are educating critical thinkers and skills that they will use in their lives, throughout their lives as articulate communicators. And I think that's the big thing is it's not just about attaining these skills, we're not teaching them to be successful in school. We're teaching them so they can use these skills outside whatever they choose to do with their life. And so that's our main focus. Some things that we're doing, Membean, you have seen before, if you've been part of this district for a little while, it went away and it's come back. We have noticed a drop off in student understanding of vocabulary and being able to comprehend higher level work. And so that's one thing that it allows, Membean allows every kid to be at their own level and achieve their goals and as they approach new words. And so that's very helpful for everyone to be successful. It's also adaptable. You can change the font for dyslexic kids or slow down the words or stop new words from coming. It's been really wonderful. Parlay, we started last year, maybe COVID education. Parlay is a great tool where you can have a dialogue online in your classroom. There's a lot of students who still feel like they cannot raise their voice in class and share their ideas. And so if I post a question for a discussion in a parlay situation, then they are each given an alias, and their alias changes every time they go and answer a new question. And so they can write their own ideas. Nobody in the class knows who they are technically. And then they can feel like they have a voice. And then the students then respond back and forth to them. And that's been very, very successful. One student, we're working on this right now in freshman English, and one student has not spoken all semester, but has really thriving here, getting a lot of ideas out there and having students respond to them. So we'll continue with Parlay. Audio, I can't even tell you the big thing with audio. And when students come into class, we try to make sure that they get Snow Owl library cards so we can find any book on audio, but often the books we read in class, there's a long delay for them to get, or if they need a book in, it might be 2 or 3 weeks or someone else needs that. So we really do need multiple copies of the books that we're reading in audio to assist our students. If they double up with audio and reading the text, it is much better for their understanding. Commonlit.org is just basic free benchmark assessments. So you have a formative, summative, you have independent lessons. So it's not something that we would do all the time, but it gives us a baseline understanding where students are, what students' needs are, and then we can kind of use all the other tools that we have to accomplish that. There are also lessons that we can target certain skills. Accessibility for all, I think really what we're looking at is differentiation for everyone.
Thanks, Jen. And a cool thing about Parlay is it was popular a little bit before COVID. It really exploded during COVID, and it was a paid subscription, and now it is free. So we are planning to continue to use it as a supplementary tool for the bonus of being free. Okay, I want to give you credit where you did it.
So accessibility, I said already about having audio for the students. The other way we can look at accessibility is looking at other students as learners. When we're selecting text, we're looking at how can we scaffold learning. And so there might be, if we have groups, we might have multiple books on a similar topic, approaching different complexity levels, different language levels, different student needs. Maybe they need something that's more high interest. And so with a different topic at the bottom there, you see 3 pictures that are graphic novels. But the graphic novel, they called us the enemy, also kind of fits with some of the other Japanese internment books that we have. So we're trying to make sure that we have books that engage all students and pull them in. That's where we're kind of going with accessibility in addition to the things.
I think this answers a bit of Andrea's question earlier, was accessibility and looking at and exploring tools that we already have, like Kami, which allows access to anything online, that students can access it in a variety of ways. Continue use of a program called Newsela, which allows leveled scoring, or a student can self-select or the teacher can select the vocabulary, the depth, or the challenge for them, so that they are able to access the same content, but at their level. So how are we measuring things? That's, we always want to see the outcomes in some data. And I know we talked about data a lot already today. These are common tools that we use that you've probably already heard about, but I'm going to give you a little snapshot update, at least at the secondary level. Membeam is a tool we've piloted and we've greatly enjoyed. We've changed some parameters. So if you have a student pre-2020, it might look different than it did when they were in the classroom. And then our curriculum and web-based assessments. I want to really highlight and give a shout out to Christine Reed. She's been on this team and has done a phenomenal job in our 8th grade ELA classroom. So what we were looking at, we talked about this a couple months ago, that vocabulary growth. And so what you're seeing on the left side, that triangle, is Diagnostic 3, which was done within the last couple weeks. And then Diagnostic 1 was in the fall. And so we're seeing at or above grade level from students going from 39 to 63% in 1 grade year. And during a pilot year, you typically will see a drop or a stabilization. So to get that type of growth during a pilot is something I really wanted to acknowledge and highlight. And in addition, the growth in, if you look on the far right, the VOC is vocabulary, Lit is literature. And then the last one, informational text, that is historically Our lowest scoring area, you can't see it if you're looking up there, if you can on Zoom, our greatest challenging area for students. And a lot of what she's brought to them this year is novels, which is fiction. So, and Marty and I were talking about the role that fiction plays and how it can help us grow as readers and learners. So we're seeing the connections to those in our data.
One of the most impressive things about this to me is that tier 2 didn't change much. So everything was drawn from tier 3 up to tier 2, and then tier 2 moved to tier 1, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. Sorry, I'm seeing it. Did it go? Click one more, please. Okay, there you go. There you go. This is 7th grade, similar diagnostics, similar information. This is more typical of what we would see in a pilot year. Still plenty of growth, especially you see 51% of our students. And this group, our library has tracked a lot this year when it comes to readers. And this group of 7th graders checks out and reads more books than any grade level in the entire district for a class of, I think it's 87. So they are voracious readers. And they're showing in their data, their growth in vocabulary. This group has never seen MemBeam, so it's a new tool for them. We've seen a big jump in their vocabulary, and they're catching up in that informational and literature-based growth. Maybe not. I did. Let me try it. It works, okay. I talked with the board about this prior to our novel scoring rubric. Our secondary team spent a lot of time thinking about what we want to bring to kids, and a lot of it was updated novels. What are we putting in the hands of our students? So you have a copy of it. So what is it? It's a bias and diversity screener tool for our teachers to use as we look at what type of books we bring into our classroom. So we screen it for the age and developmental appropriateness. So a book for a 12th grader might not be appropriate for a 7th grader. The grade level recommendations, race, ethnicity, culture of the author, what the story, the plot line is about. And then it goes into a variety of conversation or topics of persons with disabilities, socioeconomic status, family, gender, sex, sexual orientation. Part of this is what we're looking for is the normalization of and how it represents 21st century. So what's the purpose? To help our library grow and diversify the novels that we have, both by author and then the stories and the characters in it, to screen for bias or poor representation. So if you look through it in depth, you're going to notice very specificity to what we're looking for in a variety of these for what it might represent and how it's scored and what we might be looking for in trend. We want a cataloged inventory representing populations, and then to be able to pair the right book with the right student. This is ours initially as adults to use. Our goal in our next step is first, it's a working document. So as we continue to use it and we think something might need to be changed, or we've even spent 20 minutes talking about a verb or an adjective and what type of language it portrays, probably similar to the book you were referencing. And the goal is to create one for students. So as they finish books, what can they tell us about the book and their experience so that we can continue to put the right books in the hands of students, connecting back to our why of those doors, windows, and mirrors. I will link that on there for a future look for people to see it as well. And I gave you a hard copy. And so any book that you've seen back here has gone through the screener process. And so like Jen said, if I'm a new teacher and I've walked in the door and I'm curious about the books they're on the shelf, I have a tool to look at so I can see if I haven't read it yet, what I can do with it. This is just an example of some of the titles that we have piloted. They're all back there. We've spent a lot of time thinking about our students today, and some of the challenges they're facing, and then looking at our authors and the representation of the novels that we're bringing into our classrooms so that we can all bring it back to that why. Book clubs come from Penny Kittle's book. It's 4 essential studies. This has been something I think you would have witnessed in the 8th grade classroom last week. This has been so fun to watch as I walk through 7th and 8th grade hallways. So this is just an example I really wanted to highlight of the work that the teachers are putting into play right now. You might be a part of a book club, but this probably looks a little bit different in the middle school level. So what's great is students are, and in this picture you see they're previewing novels and text to see what's of interest to them. And then based off the screener and our teachers, they are using their knowledge and their relationship building with their students what they know about the student, where they want to push them, and then what they know about that text to pair them up to give them the best experience in their novel. The quote from Kittle Gallagher's text leading up to it, we're focused on attention on building momentum and establishing individual reading identities. We're looking for that joy. Book Love talks so much about reading for joy. So I have multiple students as they were doing this and says, how do I choose just one? What if I want to read them all? So it's just really great to walk into a classroom and asking students, asking me to buy more. You only have 10 copies. Can you get more so that we can read that one next? So they're engaging in this process and using the scripts and the work of Kittle and Gallagher. Students are engaging and connecting their novels to a variety of experiences of themselves or others, and gaining reading stamina and skills to get them ready for high school. This is a very abbreviated version of our scope and sequence. I think we're all in agreement that it is not ready for the stranger test yet, but those of us that have been sitting and looking at it have worked really hard. This has probably been the biggest amount of focus aside from the novel selection process in looking at our scope and sequence development. We are committed to the focus of diverse voices, experiences, and opportunities to engage in rich texts. So as a collective, we've set themes which help us to, as teachers who teach multiple grade levels, know thematically what they're looking at. And if a student read a book in 7th grade, it wouldn't show up again in 9th grade. We've had that experience where we just have not had time for this alignment yet. And then in addition, we're looking at all of our Common Core state standards: reading, writing, speaking, listening, critical thinking, and when they're introduced versus when they are practiced versus when they should be mastered, and interventions when they are not, and then what that might look like to get them ready as they graduate. So they scope up, and also we picked our themes based off of common experiences we believe 8th and 9th graders are facing. So we want them to initially see that mirror for things in their lives. A lot of that family and identity in 8th grade is a big part of your life. So we wanted to make that a highlighter, a focus. So to help name that with them as they're navigating all that. So they are accessing books that might resonate with them, or accessing books of experiences that they haven't thought about yet, but that might be coming. So while our scope and sequence, we feel it is not ready for the stranger test, has been a very big deep dive into what a 6th grade student might experience up to 12th grade. And so that our teachers, whether they've been here for X amount of years or a brand new teacher, has a better understanding of what that classroom should look like and what the student coming in experienced the year before. That's a long one, but in essence, our curriculum review team over the last 16 months has put extensive work and time into the scope and sequence, the professional development of books looking at cultural responsiveness, and our pedagogy based off of our mission and vision as a district. We unanimously suggest are in support of pursuing the adoption of our scope sequence, Norton's textbook, novel scoring rubric, and instructional text. This is the halfway point.
Are there any questions or comments from those here in the room or those on Zoom?
No questions, but I just do want to comment just how impressed I am with the level of care and the reflection of our district values that I see in the process that you put into this. And I go back a couple of years ago when I suggested some changes to our curriculum adoption policy, and this surpasses what I thought it could be. And I just really want to commend you for that. And I want to appreciate it. And I also want to send this PowerPoint to a lot of people and say, look, this is what you can do. And this is what it should look like. So thank you very much for your work on that.
I think the joy and love comes from our book study we did when we were on Zoom called Cultivating Genius. Really sparked a lot of conversations that we've had that really look at a lot of the themes you're seeing in our English classes.
I love seeing the build of that scope and sequence because it tells its own story, and building that joy, starting with the hero's journey, which is going to be those more exciting experiences for those 6th graders. I love starting there and seeing how you can inspire that joy and build to that. I think that's a fantastic example of finding the joy, which I think is so critically important. And in fact, the state Supreme Court justices who are here today were talking about finding that joy in education. So it's.
Can you go to the next slide that you have there? this slide speaks volumes that there is a unanimous vote essentially of the curriculum team. It's a diverse group of thinkers some have been here a very long time and some not so long. And so for them to come together, I really, again, applaud the team for coming together with a recommendation that is so thorough. So thank you.
Yeah, I have to say, I was really excited to see the book club and just students engaged in conversation with their peers and like kind of being able to analyze the book with peers, and also like in small groups is important too, because you can often get into like a deeper level of understanding than you would as an entire class. And it's also, I think it's really important that we're going through this curriculum review to make sure that what we teach in our district fits 21st century learning.
I just want to add that a lot of what we have done came straight from the students. They've been talking to us for years about what they like and they don't like and what they need and where they want to find themselves. And having kids go and find a book on their bookshelf where they can see themselves and then say, oh my gosh, this is the first book when I found myself. You just know that you need to do better. And so we've been listening to student feedback for years, but not having any place to put that. And so I appreciate that we had a place to put this.
I'm very impressed. Your presentation is inspiring, and I particularly enjoyed having a look at the adoption scoring rubric. And I'm impressed not just by the tool that you've created, but also by your plans for how to use it. And I think it's going to be so supportive for helping teachers match readers with books that will support them in their moment on their own journeys through life and learning. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to seeing this tool continue to evolve and be used in a variety of ways.
Really appreciate the emphasis on different types of learners, even for something that seems to be so visual as reading, but finding the way to do the audiobooks or whatever other accommodations there are. I think that's really important to look at from a base level.
Bill Carruthers from Clinton. In the K through 6 items, you said grading by equity. Would you explain what that means, please?
I think you're talking about probably the novels. I'm not, the books that our teachers are using. It's a name of a book. It's called Grading for Equity. Sorry, I'm looking for the slide just to make sure I'm highlighting what you're asking. Is this a slide by chance? I know, I apologize. It's very dense in text. I
The
apologize.
second one on the right.
Yes.
Second.
This is a book. It's called Grading for Equity. It's looking at the grading system as a whole and how we assign grades and what is an A and what is a B and what is a 4 and what is a 3. And it's rethinking and helping teachers design assessment that is more equitable and does not grade for completion and looks at the purpose of homework, because for a lot of students, homework is a privilege. I have a lot of students that work after school or they're caring for somebody in their family versus a student who gets to go home and they have access to the internet. What am I actually measuring? I'm measuring the privilege that one student has versus another. So it's helping us as teachers rethink what we're grading and why, so that we're thinking about their learning rather than circumstance or completion.
Does that fit into the growth mindset of measuring growth as opposed to completion, as you were talking about?
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways. So it's not content specific. So this is something that my science teacher read recently, and we've been talking about how we score in science compared to a lab versus something out of the textbook. So there's a lot of accessibility points. So it's not just completion versus mastery. How do I grade students with disabilities, and where's the equity, and how does that align to what they know at the end of the day, not what they've turned in per se.
That's Rufus Road, Max Welton Road. In this process, do you encourage the students to discuss what they're reading with their parents?
Yes, in short, any grown-up at their house, our teachers are in regular communication through Google Classroom, Parent Square, or other tools listing the books. We encourage students, and there's some optional conversationals about what's going on in class. What are you finding? I have a student who's reading this book and they were okay with me talking about this. Their teacher gave them a book about the main character is adopted, and this student is also adopted, and it has prompted so much rich conversation in their home that has allowed for a lot of healing and a way to bridge the conversation with them so that they are able to kind of process the experience of their adoption.
Thank you.
Second half, here we go. Thank you, Jen. The North and South Campus, I had representation from both, and I will list who those people are. I have Lori O'Brien in 3rd grade, Betsy Hofius in 4th. Marcy Courier teaches a 3-4 split, which is actually really important to have as we think about a district that's shrinking and how our classes might look. And so accessibility and technology within a curriculum and how they can help with that. Catherine Mack teaches 5th grade. Val Brown's their TOSA, and Susan Ritzner is their reading intervention specialist. Susie Richards should be on this list as well. She was very helpful and a huge cheerleader and support in this entire process. I got to go back to those names. I really got to highlight the commitment of these people, the time and the hours and the work, especially when you're looking at a K-6 curriculum, in addition to the math, the social emotional needs, science specialists. It's inspiring. So the timeline for this group, same timeline we started meeting in early spring of 2022. We assessed a needs assessment completed by all, it shouldn't say ELA, it should any teacher, and most all teachers teach ELA. We created our non-negotiables rubric using the IMET, which I've linked and shared with you. And then we reviewed and narrowed to 2 curriculum we decided to pilot, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. In the fall, we started looking at assessment, and we piloted our first curriculum. We looked at student feedback, the rubrics, and then the program as a whole. We also started peer-to-peer observations, which was done at a K-12 level, but these specific teachers were looking at it really in the framework of the pilot. In the winter, we looked, and we actually had 2 trainings with the program called CKLA or Amplify. So we had a lot of prep behind that. So we started the pilot, and then we had iReady assessment number 2. And then we started to deepen our understanding of SOR, or the science of reading. I shared with the board some sources and some materials to that, because that is kind of the theme that really drove our decisions and so much of our new learning. So in spring, we finished, we had a second PD, a short for professional development with CKLA. So there's so much technology and so much accessibility that we almost struggled to download and digest it all, and how we can bring it to students. So we met with them again. And then initially we started this as a 3-5 pilot. Susie, the team, myself, we were really looking at our data over the last 3 or 4 years and recognizing that almost 50% of our kids were qualifying for intervention. And so we thought, based off conversations with Dan and Joe about budget and timing, and as a shrinking district, if, 1 year you're teaching 4th grade, but as the numbers change and you might move down to 2nd, what would it look like if we did a K-5 adoption of the same materials? And so that was a conversation we started. We have student feedback, and then looked at our scoring rubric decision and recommendation. I'll skip that part. So the big question, and this is if you listen to podcasts or around education or in general, the huge question right now, what is the science of reading? We're shifting from balanced literacy, which is a concept of reading groups and a lot of different strategies in learning how to read based off of science in reading. These graphics are great. It is an overwhelming thing to try to condense into a few slides. So I try to share with you a lot of links and articles and materials, because it is a huge shift. I think the majority of us, if whoever went through a teaching program, this was not discussed. It's not new. So some people are wondering, is this just the newest thing? This has been researched for years, and a lot of us were talking about what was common when we started teaching, and marketing has played a huge part in what was initially adopted or found, and then in comparison to what we're really finding. So what is the science of reading? And so it has these 2 really great strands, knowledge and learning strands, that I'll try to do my best to justify, but the resources I've sent you, I would say will do a much better job. and how they collectively come together to teach reading. So the earlier stages in the K-1-2, you're looking at sight recognition, decoding, and phonological awareness, which I don't know if you've ever read with a younger kid. The idea is, well, look at the picture. What does it tell you? And while that's a great inference tool at a higher level, you're not actually helping that kid learn that word or the rules of the sounds in that word and how they blend together to make the word. And so in the secondary part, the language comprehension, you're connecting the two together by building background knowledge and asking kids about what they know about an idea to get interest, building in vocabulary, even language structure, verbal reasoning, and then literary knowledge. So there's a lot of things to unpack in the science of reading. Here's a couple great sources that we've started to dig a little bit deeper into. These are actually shared. Our ESD, which is our regional, we work with multiple districts. I work with some really great people there. I want to give a huge shout out to, and they've recommended a lot of resources. And I'm in a subgroup of people who are in a pilot as well. And these are some common tools that were tossed my way. And so they can give you a little bit of an overview, should you be looking for some light reading in it. A little more background. What I like about what I found with Amplify is they're in their 7th season of a podcast looking at the science of reading. A lot of our teachers started to dive into that and to learn a little bit more about what it means, because it's intimidating to rethink the entire way you're teaching reading to students, whether it's kindergarten or the 5th grade level. So this has been a nice tool to help to start to break down what it is and how I can do it over time and not just bring it in and do a 100% overhaul. So they're pretty realistic with helping us think about the transformation into the science of reading. So this is a really great tool. So, and some of the principles that we've studied or started to learn about in the science of reading is not natural. It can and it must be taught. Background knowledge is critical to comprehension, is as critical to comprehension as it is to decoding skills. Foundational skills instruction must be systemic and explicit, beginning with sounds. Instruction must be engaging through multiple modes and senses. And I left that one up there because it really ties to our UDL work. So we're seeing a lot of how these two will overlap. Reading instruction reduces the need for intervention and allows children to move forward as capable and confident learners, connected again to the 612 and their goals. Science-based reading instruction is a matter of equity. So they're starting this conversation of reading as a right, a civil right. And I think it's a really great way to think about how we instruct our students. Science-based reading instruction is urgent and most crucial work of the elementary teacher. So part of that is when we think about how do we structure this into our elementary teachers today. I'm not going to read this slide too much, but this is a little bit more in depth to it. And then some of the strategies you might look for in a classroom that's doing science of reading. So some of those components and then what you might look for. And so there's a lot of connection to UDL and some of the practices that we've been working on. So there is a lot of overlap and embedded in that. So I'm not going to read that one. I know it's a little dense. This is called Scarborough's Rope. So if you, again, wanted to read a little bit more about some research or some understanding in it, but essentially what it does is it's taking all the components of the science of reading, which you can't read from here because it's incredibly small, but how they're braided together. So it's thinking about how those core components are of the phonological, decoding, and awareness, and how they're connected to that knowledge strand. So CKLA braids these two together over their scope and sequence in every grade level, and then connects the units. So there is growing skill and development in each grade level. So this is a visual to try to help us put them all together. Here's another visual that I kind of enjoyed a little bit more. It's that word recognition in blue. So that's where your K-1-2 kids are really starting to build those foundational skills, and then how they bleed into it starting at the 3, 4, 5 level. And you'll start to see it as increasingly automatic. So if you've ever sat with a reader, an early reader versus an emerging reader, the automaticity is growing along with confidence. And then the strategy at the top is where at the higher levels, you're going to start to see them coming together and then braid together.
Kayla, what I also see this speaking to is typically around 4th grade, we see a dip in reading scores, and it's where those braids come together. And so what I appreciate about this shift in our philosophy and shift in how we think about reading is we're starting to understand the reason for that dip.
Yeah, it feels like this is where math and other other subjects also start like popping into that comprehension need. And so in that 3rd, 4th grade, 5th grade level. And so just seeing how those things start to converge and seeing where there's room for intervention if needed feels really important. So thank you.
So at the K-5 level, we did a needs assessment. We were curious about what our teachers felt that they needed. Again, the K-1-2 team had within the last 4 or 5 years, they had adopted a curriculum. So we'll come back to that, but we were curious about what they were looking for. So the majority of teachers were interested in new materials, better professional development to deepen their understanding and maximize the use of curriculum. An online component for accessibility, modifications, and intervention tools that could track some data. We use iReady as a tool K-8, which is great, but is not directly aligned to the curriculum. So it's a nice snapshot. And it gives us some information, but it doesn't necessarily isolate as much as we would like. We would like some alignment from grade to grade and classroom to classroom because it felt mixed or unclear. So a newer teacher versus a veteran teacher versus second to fourth felt a little choppy or inconsistent. All teachers were interested in curriculum that included varied instructional activities, targeted skill development at individual student levels, again, tied to UDL, supporting diverse learners. Well, so our five non-negotiables using the IMET rubric, and then based off of that feedback, we went with something that was non-negotiable for us when we were looking at our curriculum. The first is the range and quality of text, high quality, the alignment to standards, Common Core state standards, and then the science of reading based, skill building, and then the building of knowledge. Those we'll come back to when we look at some feedback from teachers and students. So when you asked earlier, are you going to share with us the other ones, the 2 that you piloted, and then let us know which one you're narrowing down to? We looked at what's called HMH into reading. So a few districts in our ESD have piloted, a couple have adopted this curriculum. We got a lot of positive feedback from those districts or teachers that were part of it. So we piloted this in the 3 to 5 grade level classrooms in the fall. The link to the ed reports for HMH's into reading is all green, which is, green is good in the ed reports. So it highlights a variety of areas or components that they're scoring for, and it's scored very well. The second one was done in winter spring called Amplify or CKLA. Same thing, their ed reports are quite similar. How do we select these 2? There's an overwhelming amount of curriculum. I think all of us get called, emailed nonstop from recruiters or reps, and it can be overwhelming. So a lot of our alignment with the ESG, Oak Harbor, and Linden and other schools around us and the successes or warnings that they had really helped us to narrow in on that. And then based off that information, we started to do a deeper dive into a few. There was one that looked really great, but the cost was monumental. So we just skipped right over it. As great as it is, it did not seem like something we could sustain. So we just narrowed to these 2 for a variety of reasons, those being the majority. So teachers piloted both. We did HMH or into reading in the fall and then CKLA in the spring. And then we asked teachers based off our non-negotiables and the IMET, how did they score to you? So blue is extensive, red is sufficient, yellow or green partially or weak or did not meet. So with our non-negotiable of range and quality of text, HMH scored partially met, and then Amplify was sufficient. One teacher struggled a little bit with the range. That teacher only piloted 1 unit, whereas some piloted 2. So that was something we talked about when we reviewed this. High quality text and materials worthy of students' attention, interests, rigorous, rich academic language, and appropriate complexity for each grade level. HMH was sufficient with some extensive. Amplify scored 100% teachers and students' feedback to the quality and the vocabulary, the development, and the connections students were making was really positive. Alignment, HMH talks a bit about the science of reading. When we looked at their PD and their real deep dives into it, it was pretty broad, and it didn't give us the depth that CKLA has really dug into when it comes to the science of reading. And we've seen a lot of other new curriculum come out in the last couple years, even throughout this process, that have kind of reworked some things and have put the word science of reading on it because they know that it is the newest conversation in curriculum. But we felt that it was missing a lot, especially in the first component, those building skills, foundational skills, we didn't feel as strongly in. With skill building, the variety and opportunity for critical thinking, higher level development is present and emphasized. If you look through some of the materials back here, you're going to see some student work, and I have a couple samples for you from Amplify of the growth in the skill building. CKLA has a secondary component for writing, but the writing growth we've seen and the confidence growth in our students using Amplify really blew us out of the water. We felt really excited to see kids writing and their confidence in their writing skills. Was really exciting to hear and see. And then that knowledge building. So a lot of what Amplify does is acknowledging the amount of time we are looking for in a day for this program. It's focused a lot of their content in science and social studies. So it's building a lot of knowledge in those content areas, even though it's focused in the skill of literacy. Teachers really loved the units, the reading, writing, speaking, listening, the studies that kids were allowed to do, and the diversity of how that they were doing it was really exciting for both students and teachers. And they felt that I walked into the classroom and they were doing the geology unit, and the vocabulary and the day-to-day conversation that they were able to embed into their conversations together was things I had to go look to confirm that I knew what it even meant. So it was really cool to see. So this is, again, a lot of info, but I think it's important to look at the input from teachers and students. So we let the students know, their families knew that they were being part of a pilot, and the teachers talked a lot. And Brooke, you had pointed out that you were worried about the wasted time or the density of the online program. And those are both from HMH. Teachers, they liked it. They thought the texts in HMH were great. They were rigorous. Scaffolding and some foundational supports were great. There was a lot of materials, and some people think that's great, but there was so much wasted time trying to navigate the program, or what do I need to put in my students' hands? They liked having a workbook. At times they felt like it wasn't overly rigorous. They were graphically really beautiful. We thought that they had really nice graphics. The images were great. The teaching of text elements, which is a great critical thinking skill, a great reading skill to have, was really well done. They had a program called Rigby Books, which was really fun because I could isolate a category or an area of concern that I had for a student, and then they could select a book from there. It wasn't a true intervention program, and we didn't see a connection to the science of reading. A lot of uncertainty in what the interventions were available. Even when we talked to their rep, they mentioned Rigby and some other online components, but there was not a clear data-driven way to really target intervention in this program. I went into Ms. Hophius's class in the fall. They did this really fun read aloud, and kids really loved that. They got into it. I saw a lot of confidence in them. They felt confident in their writing of paragraphs. They liked owning the book. They liked that they could really hands-on have a book still. So that was interesting to hear from students. They really still liked having hands-on material. They liked it. They liked the audio feature. HMH's online audio feature was really great. And then they could even manipulate, if you've ever done an audiobook, they could self-select how fast it read, what it read, and a lot of strategies. And that was on the student side, and they really liked that. This is a lot of dense information on Amplify from teachers, but they were pretty thrilled. They did a geology unit that targeted fourth grade science standards, and they felt that they had active student participation from the start. So it's building on that background knowledge and that science of reading, heavy in the vocabulary, really positive experiences. One teacher noted they wish the materials were more colorful. I mentioned earlier to the board, CKLA, their online program, they have contracted with some BIPOC artists to update and diversify any images that they have, which I think was pretty cool. When we asked them about that, they are working to improve that. So we appreciated that. They really liked that there were 6 to 8 week units compared to HMH's were a bit smaller, and it felt a little clunkier. So that even though we're only studying 10 areas, they felt like the depth of knowledge in each unit was giving students a really firm understanding and mastery of those areas. That last one, a teacher noted a concern in the lack of traditional intervention for striving readers. So Amplify has 2 programs. One is called M-Class. We did not pilot it, but it is an intervention program. I've sent you a couple links, and I will send you a couple more that highlights it, that we've talked more with our rep about, and how it could be something for our in-class, not an ORCA reader per se, but an in-class intervention that might prevent that step into ORCA reading. Some more teacher feedback. And then here's a couple of notes from the students. They just had it was pretty energetic responses that they gave us. They learned to write bigger and better sentences. I really liked hearing that from a third grader. So some of their, and I'll show you a couple pictures in just a minute. I now know more words. I feel like I've learned some interesting vocabulary. What I'm hearing is confidence in what they learned, which I thought was really interesting to hear or think about at a third, fourth grade level. Here is some third grade writing. First of all, really nice handwriting. I was impressed with that. But this is the stamina that Amplify is asking our readers to do. They're also using information from the text, which walking into a high school class is still a skill that they are developing. So they're taking information based off their units. They're writing for stamina. They're writing varied sentence structures, and they're using in-text information. I thought that was pretty powerful. Couple more over here. So these are a couple, I know those are great. That's why I'll give you the link for later. Here's some graphic organizers to give a variety of formative and summative information. So this is from the Greek and Roman God and Goddess column, and then diving into vocabulary. And then I'd like just why is ancient Rome considered a civilization? So we're asking third and fourth grade students this, and they're taking their knowledge of what they read and they're applying it. So they're supporting evidence, which again is a skill we're developing. Gosh, I start in kindergarten up to 12th grade. Katya?
Can I just say I'm very impressed by the handwriting.
Right?
Like very impressed.
I know. It's like, I look forward to that. Yeah, I was pretty blown away with that. Yeah.
But before we move on, I just want to shout out the octopus, who's also very smart.
Thank you. This was not written by, this is done by hand. Thank you. Not
I want to
AI
point
based.
out that when they're listing like different parts of, like when they're listing things, they have a comma between the last object and the and. Like that's like
All hail
SAT
the
level.
Oxford comma.
They are ready. And teachers, we're in SBAC right now, and the teachers were really excited about the confidence of, it's really stressful to ask a third grader to do what the SBAC asks in the writing component, and they felt a lot more ready or prepared to send that task to our students. Yeah, these are great to read. So there's more back there, but I just want to give you, these are from Ms. Courier's third, fourth grade split class.
I appreciate that a third grader can spell platypus because I don't think I can.
So again, what is data telling us about our pilot? I would say whatever we choose to purchase, I would say give us a year to 2 based off of research. Knowing what a pilot does, the dip, the fidelity of teachers can be kind of challenging. But what is this showing us? And I will point out that I only have diagnostic 2 because the elementary level between camp, 5-6 camp, they're at camp right now. K4 is in SBAC right now. So they will be doing iReady after their SBAC window. So I will have diagnostic 3 available. But this is more of a snapshot of in the fall and then in winter. So this was more realistic to where they were with our first pilot. But iReady is still our primary tool, especially during a pilot because it's longitudinal for us.
Kayla, did Oak Harbor adopt Amplify?
Yes, they did.
So I heard from a bird that their initial data is coming back with 100% of kindergartners reading on grade level from the change. And then the first grade, their initial data is coming back at 80% at grade level. So I think our neighbors to the north have some good insight into what students respond to within that system.
Yeah. And our team went and we got to watch lessons in Oak Harbor. I might be out of order on I'm a little out of order on my slides, but last June we went up and we watched Amplify lessons. They were at the end of their first year. And we got feedback from teachers and their director of teaching and learning, Liz Ritz, and their instructional TOSAs about some feedback, some information, and they shared with us their data. And we were pretty shocked.
Just another tidbit on that. They also adopted during COVID because they had some dollars and they didn't go through the process with staff to get the staff buy-in first. So it delayed their implementation a bit. So I think we'll be seeing some really positive results if people are buying into around it in the implementation process.
We're jumping the gun. I want to stay on track, but you're answering all my question or my thoughts already. A big question we had in this process is what about Orca Reading? That is our intervention program. We as a team felt that we need to give that a really deep dive. We need to look at what we're offering and what program we're using, and is it rooted in the science of reading? So we need more time to explore and potentially pilot that before we can really make our best recommendation. Brooke asked, what about what Amplify provides? They do have an intervention program we will be looking at to see. What we like about magnetic reading and why we waited so long is because it did not get published into Ed Reports until I think it was March of this year. And we did not feel as a team we wanted to bring something into our schools that wasn't vetted through a third party. It is now on Ed Reports and it was rated very highly. So we'll be looking at that. What we like about it is it's correlated right to our K-12 or K-8 assessment system already. So there's a lot of connection to that. And then the other three, Sunday System and UFLI are programs both recommended through our ESD. So we'll look at that based off of our needs of the class, the program, and then what Amplify does for our intervention itself. And we'll be coming back to you once we have made some more decisions in that. But we felt that we needed more time and a commitment to really choose the best program for that.
And just for those who are here or watching on Zoom, when Mrs. Phillips mentions questions that a board member asked, she provided some a look ahead, and we provided some questions to her just in the interest of no surprises, some questions that we intended to ask here at the meeting. So she's jumping ahead of us before we can actually ask the questions, which is fine. I just wanted to let people know we haven't had discussions about this elsewhere. We have provided, she's provided a sneak peek of the information. We've provided a sneak peek of the questions that came up.
And I appreciated those. So based off of all our experience in the last 16 months, our 2 pilots, our work with our reps, the PD we've had, we've looked at Amplify, and as you saw in our rubric, our reasons for recommendation for Amplify are as follows. It's aligned to our state standards. It's the science of reading as a critical component of it in all grade levels, especially foundational levels, which will support at-risk readers and alleviate the strain on our Orca reading program. Our friends to the north, Oak Harbor, Linden, and other larger districts in our ESD have recently adopted, are piloting, or are having conversations with me about Amplify, as well as other programs. The collaboration and utilization of the resources of these schools and the ESD, our TOSA's literacy coaches, they've openly shared, and we have continuation of conversations and collaboration with them, which as a smaller district, we have to acknowledge that we don't have some of those resources, and their openness to the belief that all students deserve to read has really benefited our smaller district. Our pilot teachers' feedback was overwhelmingly positive, energizing along with students. Students' feedback inferred high interest in growth and higher level thinking, phonics, vocabulary, and their excitement for learning in writing, learning what they're reading and then writing about it was really apparent in their feedback. Professional development, or PD, there's strong opportunities in this when we go having conversations with our rep about what that looks like for us, and then conversations with schools that have implemented this and what their PDs look like and how we build that into our schedule for the next couple of years alongside Susie, and what that PD schedule will look like is something we highly value and are looking to add into our program. So similar to the last one, our team voted unanimously in support of recommending to the board the adoption of the CKLA Amplifies curriculum because it aligns to our district's goals, vision, and mission to prepare our students to be literate and meet the challenges of our global society. It's research-based and highly rated in Ed Reports, and aligns to the pursuit of teaching literacy using the science of reading as the driver.
I just want to say how much of a testament it is, Ms. Phillips, to your leadership that you had not only one unanimous recommendation, but 2. Curriculum adoptions are tough, and oftentimes people go away from the table feeling unheard or feeling like what they saw in a curriculum wasn't seen by the group. And so to have 2 unanimous recommendations is amazing. And thank you for the time and care and leadership and thought that you put into how you facilitated those conversations.
I'll selfishly say I really enjoyed them. I've met some really great people in our district. Susie and I talked a lot about what it might look like for K-1-2 because they did not pilot this program, and the conversations with some of those teachers and their concerns. So we've heard that. We're engaging in that and discussing that and the realistic approach to it. And how we're going to nurture that and what the professional development and the time in those Wednesday schedules going to look like so that we can provide those opportunities for them to have time to dig through and wade through all of the things and think about what they can do. And again, the support from our ESD and what that's looked like, because schools who are 2 years into it, they're willing to share with us mistakes they've made and what we can avoid.
Speaking of PD, a couple of the questions that I had are, will staff at that K-5 level be able to do some cross grade professional development as well as at grade level? Because I feel like that's part of the joy of having curriculum that moves upward with kids. Cool, yay. And then the next, I love it when there's like one answer and it's yes, it's great.
Well, and that's a part of why we looked at it as we shrink in our, we have one grade level that's really big and one that's really small. The idea that teachers might move grade levels for a year or two, but that to then have to walk into a curriculum that they know nothing about and they weren't part of the experience of the professional development is just setting us back.
So then my secondary question is, how then does the K-5 program, how will it bridge and blend into that secondary program? And I know you covered that a little bit, but again, thinking about teachers, maybe having to move classrooms and also maybe moving schools.
Catherine Mack is on the K-5 adoption. So she's done the pilot and she will be coming up to the 6th grade. So she has done an amazing amount of work in this and is also ready to become a 6th grade teacher. So she embodies that bridge for the process. And the team has been in conversation. I've shared any science of reading conversations at the K-5 level up to the 6-12 because science of reading doesn't stop at the 5th grade level. So how do we continue to support that? That's why programs like MemBeam and some of those other tools are helping to still grow those skills is what we're looking at. And then sharing the materials. Here's the scope of this. What's 5th grade doing to get them 6th grade ready? As small as we are, there's no reason to not have those open dialogues. Next year, our professional development time is at the same time. So we're hoping to have some shared connection time that those conversations can be had.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I love the hands-on like materials. That's really fun. Like I like that kids still want to read a book, like that brings my heart joy. And that there's a lot of student choice and student participation and it's building confidence in kids. And I also love the concept of the context being embedded in the content, because I know, back many moons ago when I taught English, there was a lot of, I have to tell you this story so we can read that one. And so how cool is it that it's learning, across curriculums. And it also sounds like a lot of the context, historical, social, cultural, is built into the work itself, which is really powerful. So thanks for sharing that piece too.
Yeah, they double dip in the Common Core state standards because the recommended time for literacy each day is 120 minutes. And if you've seen an elementary classroom, that's not typically the amount of time that is given to that. And the teachers that we've talked to, we're getting reactions, but it's also looking at getting smarter about how you use your time that you've allotted for science or social studies and how that could become literacy so that there's some flex to that. And then we're double dipping on our standards.
I love seeing all the interdisciplinary stuff. Looking at the materials back there, seeing that there are sections on Greek and Roman mythology, on geography, on astronomy, on all sorts of different things that remind not just our teachers, but also our students that reading is part of all of these things and all of these things are part of reading. I really loved seeing that. Most of the questions that I had actually were answered in the full presentation, which I really appreciate. So I'm going to skip most of those. You alluded to the M-class activities as intervention based. Are those something that you would like to look at after this is if this is adopted, you'd like to look at adding that on afterwards, or is that with a pilot program, or is that something you'd like to look at adding on immediately?
That's not a question I can answer on my own, but I would say looking at data and looking at the time commitment we're going to put into this, it would be something I'd want to consider from the start so that we can start to look at who should qualify and go into orca reading versus an in-class intervention, which might provide just that little bit of targeted work that they might need. And then also allow teachers to because it's personalized. So a student, they could still work with other kids here. So it gives them more opportunity in what type of instructional strategy they might use in the classroom and to normalize it as just part of the curriculum.
If I can add really quickly, Kayla, we've had some conversations with our staff and the M class. They're really looking for that in the general ed curriculum, part of their regular instruction. Then we'll go into that tier 2 with Orca reading and still have alignment with our tier 3. So I feel really good about having that range of options.
There's also flexibility in the timeline of the acquisition of the remedial part of this. If the board, obviously it's our recommendation that the board adopt this curriculum plan at the next meeting. And Dan can speak to it more directly, but we have set aside the funding for this curriculum adoption, knowing for the last 2 years that it's our plan to adopt and the approximate cost of doing that. So we've planned for this. And then the ancillary services that we may need to purchase afterwards would be part of that and expected. But the decision on that it doesn't have to be a board decision for what we use for remediation, if that makes sense.
How long a duration are you looking at with this curriculum adoption? I know some are just a few years and some are up to like 10 or 12 years.
Our initial conversation was with a 6-year quote. It's conversation, but around 6 is what we did for math, and they're ending their 6th year next year. So we're looking at 6, and it's always variable when it comes to budget and timeline. And then the longer you go, the chipping away. So that's a conversation we'll have based on conversations together. But typically 6 is what we started with.
You had made very brief mention of the last curriculum adoption at the elementary level. Would you elaborate on how that went and what was learned?
It was prior to me, and they had a successful adoption and pilot, and I think Susie was around. I'm not sure if she was principal yet. And I think one of our big findings from it is it's a good curriculum. It is heavily culturally responsive, which teachers have really raved about. And we learned a lot about our lack of professional development that we had part of that. There's a great intervention tool that we didn't train all teachers in, which we learned was a mistake on our part. And so we're looking at it. It is not rooted in science of reading either. So we're struggling with this full implementation, and Susie could probably speak a little bit to it as well, as she was here at least at some point.
It was kind of a pilot because we couldn't come to agreement. And so we piloted at the early level because we had a couple of teachers who agreed. And so it was a step, but it wasn't a full implementation like this. I mean, this has been a 16-month project, so a little bit different. But Susie, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just going to add that our K2 teachers are really excited about the opportunity to adopt the Amplify as well, because that opportunity for a K5 straight through and with the PD and being able to do that cross age work together is really exciting for them. So that's what we're hoping is to be able to. They're ready, Kayla. K2 is ready.
And Kayla also alluded to one other thing that is actually a huge deal, which is the idea that we will have common planning time because we go to a single start and end time next year, which means all of our teachers K-12 on Wednesdays will end their day at the same time, which means we can do the cross-curricular work far more easily. So that's a real bonus of we are shrinking, and that's why we're able to do a single bus run, single start and end time. And that's a real plus for us in this regard.
And just really quickly, I'd like to add one thing. That one of the things, we had a staff meeting today and we talked pretty extensively. There was an article in the New York Times yesterday regarding curriculum adoption in and of itself is not going to change things. It's a professional development and the consistent opportunity for collaboration. And so it's going to be critical for us to have that time next year, both at a district level to have the PD that's brought in, but also for our teachers to have time together. That's going to be really key.
I just wanted to call out one other benefit of the Amplify curriculum that we've talked about and that my wife has also experienced up at Coopville is that it is a living curriculum, that because it's majority online, they make updates and changes as they get feedback from the people actually doing the work in the schools, whether they're administrators or teachers. And I think that that's a fantastic benefit. You had mentioned some of the complaints about lack of color, and immediately they were updating it. I mean, that's really, really powerful for a curriculum, in my opinion. Joe, I see.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, plus ones to the praise that others have given. Such a very thorough presentation. And it's so obvious that the curriculum committee just did an amazingly thorough job bringing this to us. So given the importance of PD and the success of a transition like this, should the board adopt these recommendations, what is the plan to roll out the new curriculum and sort of scale the PD from pilot to full?
That's a good question. The reality is 3 of our teachers that'll be in this building next year were part of the team. So looking at how we schedule that early, so getting your approval and then getting the process going to commit, to get materials coming, to get access to online. We already have access to their online platform, just so any teacher K-5 can start to gain access. And a lot of it is just finding time to see things, and then the collaboration with our other districts and the ESD to see what they've done and how they've scaled their scope and sequences for what's realistic in a first year versus a second or a third year overhaul. And then embedding time within Amplify and their professional development, and then building time into our PD schedule where teachers are coming together to have some common prep, some common time. So if, for example, Ms. Hofius was in the pilot, so she might, take lead in helping the 4th grade team next year and what it looks like based off her experience or her knowledge, whereas her counterpart might be heavier in the prep of the math for the year, so that they are sharing the load, but they're learning from one another in order to be able to meet all the needs of all the content areas.
Thank you. And what's your plan to keep the board appraised over this? I realize that it may be a while, like multiple years, as we watch the data come in to understand whether we made the right decision. So what's your plan to keep the board updated throughout that?
That's a good question. Based off conversations I've had, people say, we'll be doing our regular formative and assessments. 1.5 to 2 years, we'll likely see a dip in some of it, just with the implementation and the fidelity to the program, based off of something like iReady, but within content or through Amplify, doing some of those smaller assessments to see individual student growth is something we'll be tracking. And so I'd say within our school improvement plan for next year and the second year would probably more realistically give us an accurate snapshot of the full implementation.
Thank you.
I just want to add really quick too, during our staff meeting today, one of the things our teachers talked about was aligning their student growth goals next year with doing that formative assessment throughout with the new curriculum. So we're excited about that they're asking for that.
I want to recognize that we have subject matter experts here and call in our student reps and some of our other administrators if they have any feedback or added comments or questions.
It's really cool to see how this curriculum is being used and piloted, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it grows. You know, as a high school student, we use Membean for 3 15-minute like sections each week, and that's really cool. And Parlay is always fun, seeing which anonymous person you are, and then you go and research who you are, and that's always interesting. And also looking at this book table, I've read some of these books, and I know in the next week I think I'm starting another one of them that will be used to help see if it's going to be used for future classes. So that's really cool, seeing how the curriculum is already being implemented in the high school and seeing how it's going to be used next year in AP Lit.
Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting to kind of look at like the rubric and how like the curriculum team decides on like what things to highlight and look at. I also thought it was interesting to kind of look into the science of reading, as well as like not looking as reading or literature as like one area, but how it can be like incorporated into social studies, science. I mean, it's important to be able to, understand literature and also be able to communicate what you're reading as well. And I also enjoy having an updated curriculum, again, like I mentioned earlier, that like really fits the society we're living in, and also allows representation. Because I think being able to connect with what you read is such an important part of growing. Like it's hard to really like, I guess, connect with the text if you don't feel yourself represented.
I also think that the idea that students piloted and students gave input, whether or not they knew as students that they were part of this adoption process. I mean, in third grade, they may not necessarily know that you're trying this out to see if what you think of it. But the idea that students engaged in helping us select a curriculum, I think it's really important that we've continued to develop student agency.
The survey feedback was really fun to read.
In the program Amplify, is there a place for teaching of phonics, or am I in a different area?
You're right in there. Yeah. So phonics is one of the foundational components of, especially at K1, 2, and then it's built into 3, 4, 5 and beyond. It's an essential component to learning to read that they have explicitly targeted. Yes.
And just a question out, there was excellent handwriting, by the way,
I know, right?
but it was print. Is cursive taught?
Cursive is a supplemental third grade skill that is taught, but it's not a requirement that students are going to have to use. But at times, and Susie can probably weigh in a bit as well, it's not the primary component of their ELA curriculum.
I can note that my first grader has had some experience with cursive already. Not traditional, not explicit lessons, but she's gotten experience with it and seen it and learned to use some of it even at first grade.
Rufus again. I've got a couple of things. It sounds to me like we're buying a proprietary product. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
How much does it cost?
We don't have a final dollar amount. I've been working with Dan and Joe on what our budget is worked within based off of what they've budgeted for. And it's going to vary depending on if we do 6 years, if we get the intervention program now, if we add on some writing components or not. So we don't have a final dollar amount until we've gotten approval to then go back to our rep to have conversations about that.
So how will the board know what the cost will be if they vote for it next meeting?
Once they give approval, if they do, then I go back with Dan and we get our budget and then we work within that. So they will know once it's been purchased. I'm not sure that, do they need the dollar amount approval? They just need to approve it. And
They
then
need to
Dan,
approve
Joe.
the curriculum and be assured that we have a budget for that.
And
But just I'm not going to ballpark it, but correct. Yeah, there. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, last fall, we received what the federal government referred to in its enrollment stabilization funds of about $600,000. So we will have sufficient funds for whatever the adoption cost will be for this. And I earmarked about half of that for this particular process.
So again, just in terms of in 2011, we adopted a high school curriculum or a 612 curriculum in social studies. And in 2011, it was $100,000. So now it's 2023 and we're adopting something K-12. So you can imagine the cost of a curriculum for our district. It's expensive. And the reason why it's taken 16 months to narrow it to a selection that is science-based.
I'm not questioning the quality of the product. I'm interested in knowing what the cost is and that the public knows that. It sounds as though you can step into this thing at different levels. And is it tied to the number of students that take this, or is it just for all districts pay the same amount?
That's a great question. There's so many components to it that any dollar amount is going to be different district to district based off of the professional development you want to purchase, the number of materials, so the number of students who might access it, the amount of online connections you might have and select, and then the amount of years that you want to commit to. So if you buy for 1 year versus 6, they're going to charge you more for a 1 year versus if you do 6, those over year to year is going to be a little bit less.
So I'm sensitive about the business of getting federal money that doesn't continue. And is there some sort of assurance? I don't know how that could be. I know that the
Yes.
federal government changes its mind.
I can answer that
periodically.
for you, Rufus. We already have the money in our bank account.
I'm talking about next year and the
No,
year after that, and the
We
year
have
after
enough,
that, and the
we
year after
received
that.
enough in the enrollment stabilization, which was an unexpected.
Is this a one-time payment or is it?
Yeah, it's a one-time purchase and we already have the funds for it. Earmarked for it from a federal grant that we hadn't expected to receive.
And it will cover us for 6 years.
The next question is, are the students here provided with a list of Latin and Greek prefixes and suffixes as part of their reading, a comprehensive list?
I would not say comprehensive, but part of and there's even a unit back here that touches on that. So there's some knowledge to that, especially in their vocabulary and in their phonological awareness. But we're not teaching an isolated Greek and Latin words, especially at the elementary level.
No, just my daughters found it very useful to have this printed list and they would refer to it frequently.
Mr. Rose, if I could just add that having visited some of the elementary school classrooms, I've actually seen Latin prefixes and suffixes on the walls in some of the classrooms as a helpful visual aid for early readers.
Yeah, I was talking about something the kid had themselves. They could take it home and play with it. The printing that was up there, I couldn't see it from this distance, but I'm curious about the logic of not teaching, not requiring cursive as well as printing. And why is that we're doing that? And the question I always ask anybody that's interested is, have you seen your great-grandmother's journal? And would you be interested in knowing what she wrote and you can't read it?
Yeah, sometimes I'll have a student carry a note in cursive. I'm like, what's this? Because yeah, they can't necessarily read in cursive. Yeah, so it's a drawback, but when we're looking at what do we need to prepare our students for the 21st century, cursive is a secondary skill that we want to expose them to and give them the opportunity to see. But the amount of time to commit to teach cursive, I remember learning it in 3rd grade and it feels like that's all I did. To commit that much time to it would be taken away from a lot of other opportunities to prepare them for their future grades.
What other opportunities?
Reading, social studies, thinking, collaboration, all these skills that we're preparing our students for so that they can go out and get 21st century jobs.
If a student writes in cursive, is that accepted?
Yes.
I would just add on that subject that, I was part of a generation that had access to computers in classrooms I was among the first of the students who had access to computers in classrooms. And, penmanship and typing skills needed to cohabitate in my educational experience. And I think I'm imagining that, as we lean more into the technological age, more time needs to be allotted for technological skills as well as the traditional skills of writing.
And then to the point earlier about Latin roots, I believe the program we use for 6 through 12 MEMBing, it really focuses on like root words, like, what's in front of a root, what's in front of like a word and like how to connect words and their meanings and like how it's rooted in Latin. So that's a big part of that tool we use as well.
My question was just, are the students provided with a list? There are comprehensive lists of Greek and Latin prefixes and suffixes that are available. And my daughters enjoyed playing with them. They did extra study just because they learn faster.
Some teachers might, but it's not a requirement of our curriculum.
And Rufus, what I'm hearing in Audrey's response is that it might not be a list that's sent home the way that you're thinking of it, but that it's more of an interaction and a kinesthetic tool for students to engage with as a whole. So it's not necessarily the same piece of paper that would go home in your binder, you'd put it in the front and whichever, but that it's something that's more interactive. And Audrey, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's something that has become more embedded in the curriculum work that you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of days students might lose that piece of paper with the Latin roots. And it's another great thing about Membeing is you can like connect the words you're learning with, like, and then you focus in on the Latin root of that word and then like connecting to other words. So like allows you to look at that word and then break it down, which is super helpful.
You used the term several times, non-negotiable. Would you explain that, please?
It's a great question. There's a system called the IMET instructional measure, and I can't remember the last half. It lists a variety of things that as a team, what is something that you are not willing to sacrifice when you're looking at curriculum? So as a team, we've narrowed to 5 because there are so many to measure. It's something that if a curriculum didn't meet that non-negotiable for us, we wouldn't consider it for our students. So if we felt like a non-negotiable of like
Science of reading.
If a curriculum didn't have that, we wouldn't consider it for adoption. It's something we are not willing to flex on.
That leads me to another question. Does that mean there's a whole panoply of options and we've just selected some of them, or are we going for the whole tomato?
Yeah, there's a large variety. So as a team, we had to look at them to decide what we know about our students based off the feedback from our data, our needs assessment. What are things that we as a team, we are responsible for the curriculum we're bringing to all of our teachers. What do we feel that is something we are not willing to be flexible on?
Does that mean there are some options that we did not select?
Yes, we narrowed down to 5.
And they're listed so the parents can be aware of what will be required. It's not optional, I guess.
In the curriculum,
And
yes.
other stuff that is available that the parent might want to pick up and help their own children with.
Not necessarily, because it's really skill-based. So the non-negotiable. So if we looked at a curriculum that did not have science of reading in it, we felt as a team that it's not something we would bring to our school.
I guess my last question, being a geezer here, is this the kind of thing that parents can screw up by not understanding that if a parent's trying to help their child and they don't understand it themselves, is that likely to cause confusion for the child?
It's not like the new math we all learned about a while ago. No, one of the biggest successes of learning to read is having a grown-up read to you. So when a parent is sitting with their kid and if they're feeling that they want to help them with reading, they should read to their kid, read with their kid. So with this, if their kid brings something home and they're struggling with it, the best thing you could do is read. Pick up a book for joy, something that you connect with together, a shared hobby. That would be the recommendation when it comes to teaching reading to your student.
I would also add that the technology component of the curriculums that we're looking at will also make doing that much more accessible for some of our parents who might be struggling readers. So instead of sitting down and having to be vulnerable with your own child and not being able to maybe read the text that's in front of you, it's utilizing the technology to listen to it together or to have support in the technology framework to help a parent who might not understand what they're trying to help their child with.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Unless there are any last comments or questions, I'd like to finish this up because we do still have several policy points to go into and my computer is getting down on battery.
So is mine. We will be placing this as a recommendation on the board's agenda for the business meeting this month. If you have any further questions or need for clarification, if you send them ahead, we'll make sure we address them at the next meeting before you have to vote on that.
I know that Mr. Pullman doesn't like ballparking, which I completely understand, but it would be useful, at least for me, I don't know about other members of the boards, to see the range of costs.
We will have that for you. We just won't have a specific bottom line PO.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anything else on this? Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Phillips. That was comprehensive and amazing, as others have said. We'll move on to policy.
Right.
Andrew, Director Downs.
I'm going to bring this up while you talk about it. Andrea.
Okay, so we're going to start off with student concussions and head injuries. This was brought to us by our district nurse for consideration of changing. So I'm assuming that all Directors have read the proposed changes. I don't see any issues with it.
I just have a question about one of the changes that was confusing to me. It looks like it removes a requirement for parents to sign something about.
Scroll down.
Scroll down, the signatures there.
It's just moved.
It's just
Okay,
moved.
it was combined, the concussion and cardiac? Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Any other discussion on this one? Okay, and then there's policy 1400 around public comment.
And this is when we also want to look at 5161 in combination. I just wanted to address this one briefly, if I may. This was something that came up that sparked after the last meeting where I'll speak for myself, where I found that some of the comments, while within the letter of the law for the most part, except for a few that were cut off for our public comment, some of them were against the spirit of the law. And I wanted to look at how we're talking to each other here in a public meeting, in a public forum. And I heard from numerous other board members that they were interested in taking a look at this because it's a delicate balance because we don't want to cut off someone's passion. We know that the thing that people are most passionate about in their world is what affects their children. And we don't want to cut that off. We don't want to force them into a uncomfortable way of presenting themselves. But we also want people to remember that there are people on all sides of all of these issues and that we're talking about people and to recognize that words have impact and that maybe the letter of the law as we have it is not sufficient.
I want to address the term uncomfortable and then also address the term harmful. And there is a balance and a line. And as I'm looking at these two policies side by side, both of them have expectations that are also cultural and societal expectations, that we be civil and that we be thoughtful. And we interact with, if not kindness, neutrality and good intention. And so, and I believe these policies speak really clearly to that. And so in light of the last meeting, in light of how many interactions in our society go today, it feels really important to me that we not only look at these policies, but really study them. And as a board, collectively speak truth to power about how we are feeling as someone who is held to a higher standard. And also expect public speakers, especially when they are educators and they are modeling for kids, that they also live in their higher expectations. I don't think that's wrong for us to expect that. It's built into the policy. It's very clear. So our language as a board needs to reflect that and collectively hold people responsible for how they conduct themselves in these meetings.
I would just like to add that our administrators are here in their professional capacity. This is their job. This is their livelihood. I'm here as a volunteer elected by the public to represent the needs of our community, to ensure that our students are educated in a safe and welcoming environment. And it feels very dangerous to me to allow public comment to include behavior that is vitriolic and accusatory at a level that would not be tolerated by a member of our administration or staff in speaking in the opposite direction to the public. And so I would just ask that our public comment policy ask for the same standards of behavior on both sides of that table.
Yeah, something I like to point out is I think public comment especially is a really sensitive topic, because how I personally view public comment is a way for people to express their views. And honestly, I know obviously we operate differently as a board, but for people to express their First Amendment rights. And that's really important for me. And I think it's important that we look at this critically to make sure that we're honoring respect, and we're making sure that we have a respectful environment in our boardroom, but also, allowing for people to have disagreements and be critical of our district. Because I think if people get the memo that we're trying to refrain what people comment and say, it kind of gives a bad view. But of course, it's important that we have a safe environment as well, as it is embedded in our district mission and goals as well.
Yeah, I don't think that anybody wants to silence the message that was trying to be sent. I think that there are different ways and different ways of decorum that are appropriate in different settings. And so your First Amendment right looks different at a protest or at a rally than it does in a public meeting. I can conduct myself differently in a conversation with board members, right, than I would a conversation with an administrator. And I think what we're trying to talk about is how to recognize what is the level of decorum that is expected in these meetings, and how would we want that to be presented, because it's not necessarily, and I recognize that it is landing primarily on the public, because we're not in a situation in this current board where we have been before, where it's not the board members or the administrators who are breaching the decorum.
When I'm looking at, it was up for just a sec. When I'm looking at, yeah, if you could pop thank you. I'm looking at the expectation of stakeholders, board of directors, employees, parents, volunteers, contractors, and visitors. The first thing I see is that we treat each other and students with dignity and respect. And so I think what I'm speaking to is dignity. And again, when we move from a place of uncomfortability, it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to feel feelings around, I don't always care, I don't care for the tone, or I don't care for how someone is speaking to me. But dignity, and we had a whole morning's conference on this at the WASDA conference in September, which some of us got to attend, and we talked about dignity as this ineffable and necessary human right. And so, what I'm looking at is that specific word, I think, and it's not about, not letting people articulate and not feel their feelings and not even get emotional. Like it's okay to have emotion. Like that is a powerful resource. But when we lose our own dignity, and when we don't offer dignity to others, we have now negated this entire standard. And we have turned a meeting that deserves some decorum into something that is harmful and no longer just uncomfortable. So I think that is, for me, the difference between allowing folks to speak and share and emote in a way that is clear and true to their story and true to their moment, and also retaining their own dignity and retaining the dignity of others.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think dignity is really important. Another thing I'd like to point out about the professional communication standards is I would encourage the board to kind of almost detach it from the public comment section we had last meeting, because this is something that applies to everyone in our district, including students in the building. And, when we look at how it's implemented, say 3 years from now, we're not going to be talking about that one specific public comment section, but rather dignity and respect in our district as a whole. So I think that's an important perspective to look at when we're looking into this policy.
Absolutely. I would see, like, if I was putting my professional hat on, this would be a policy I would call into maybe a parent meeting that has some really high stakes in the conversation. This would be one where if, as a teacher, in previous districts that I've worked in, if I had email communication that I felt was really violating my rights as a professional, right? So maybe a parent who wants a response at 2 o'clock in the morning and is upset that they didn't receive that. These would be the policies that I would lean into, and that I've experienced an administrator stepping in with and saying, this is what we're going to hold our educators to, this is what we're going to hold you to. And this kind of a policy in particular can really help diffuse some of those tensions and set some norms for productive conversations that otherwise wouldn't be happening. And Kayla, it looks like you have.
I was just going to echo the support that it brings when you are walking into a hard conversation. And I'm talking to my colleagues, the amount of burnout that people are having in education right now is alarming. And I think these are pretty basic standards that we should have and model to our students. So when kids are seeing adults acting like this, and then we're seeing those same behaviors at school, it's hard to separate the two.
My question around this, and last meeting notwithstanding, anytime a member of the public, and Brooke, when we were having some struggles a couple of years ago with members of the public, you took it upon yourself as the representative of the board to always say, and you said it tonight, you know, criticize the action, not the person. So my question is really about how do you enact the policy in the heat of the moment? Because that is not easy and it's not your muscle memory, right? And so I've encouraged any board I've worked with that we follow Robert's rules, right? When we do a business meeting, we follow Robert's rules, because when meetings are easy, it's not a big deal. But when things get difficult, you need to have something to come back to. And practice, like anything else, is important. So my question around this is, I don't think it's I think it's awesome to review the policy. I think it's also really important to have a way for the board to realize it's happening and intervene, because that is the piece I think that was missing.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. And I think that one thing that's going to be important is something that I looked up for the last meeting, since it was the first one in a while I hadn't shared that I'd been present for, which is any board member should be allowed to chime in with a point of order during public comment if they feel that something along these lines does not fulfill our policies. And that's going to take practice for us to be
I
comfortable
don't
doing
want
that.
to have to practice,
Right,
quite frankly.
right.
Because, and I will be blunt, you know, I felt as the superintendent was the target last meeting, which is often the case. But it stepped over the line to the personal. And so there was, speaking for myself, I became sort of dumbfounded, right? A little shocked, which was the intent, and it worked. And we were all quiet and said, thank you. And that was not what any of us intended, because it was vitriolic. And so how do we go forward?
Brooke, I appreciate the clarification on the fact that any board member can step in. Because, of course, I see you as chair and therefore collective voice. So, that is helpful clarification. I also want to apologize to the room and to Dr. Moshe because I have not done my research around how to properly facilitate a meeting here when it gets vitriolic. And so I think some of the work that I need to do personally is just know my Robert's rules better and know what language to use to step in and not light fire to the situation, but to actually, control, using that word relatively, and calm. And so that is research that I'm willing to do in terms of what language can we use collectively so that when, things get heated, as they sometimes do because emotions elicit that, how do we then professionally and with dignity move forward in a way that is not harmful?
And I want to make it very clear that although any board member can step in with a point of order, it is the chair's duty to be on top of that. And I want to share that. Thank you for offering that apology. And I want to offer my own version of that also to Dr. Moshe and to everyone who is present, that, and I'm going to go beyond the last meeting. In previous meetings, I tend to err on the side of allowing public comment to continue. And I want public comment. I think that's incredibly valuable for this board, but I do want to get better at recognizing where that line is. And I think dignity is a really powerful determinant there, both the dignity of the speaker and of the recipients. And so I need to get myself better and more comfortable at intervening there as well. But I also want to empower all of you to help me with that as you feel comfortable.
And I want to thank you, Director Johnson. I want to thank you for referencing the language around dignity, because that is so important. And I think that is the measure where we can avoid stepping into the dangerous territory of tone policing, or, so often the word civility is used as a mask for maintaining privilege and continuing systemic oppression. And so I think one thing that would have supported me to be more grounded and more able to intervene in a case where I was witnessing verbal abuse would have been if I had referenced this professional communications standards guideline prior to going into a meeting with the public. If I had had language close at hand around, not using, for instance, disrespectful nonverbal behaviors or other things on this list, it would have been easier for me to step forward and call a point of order and ask for the respect that everybody in the room on both ends of the microphone deserve.
I want to be clear that this is new language. This is not in our policy
Yes,
currently. So
yeah, and I'm referencing it mostly because I believe that language like this could support us in having a cleaner, clearer policy to uphold.
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to plus one that and kind of tie it back to your original question, which was, had this policy been on our books a few weeks ago, like what could have gone differently? And I think that's exactly what it was. I kind of I had my hand on the button and I didn't know what to say, because I felt in my heart that some of the speech from the public comment was not acceptable, but I didn't know what the words were to say. And I think 5161 gives me the vocabulary to say that this isn't how we speak to each other, and here's why. And back to the First Amendment you brought up, that was initially a concern of mine, but there is a carve out for speech that is not considered disruptive simply because it's a unpopular viewpoint. And so I think it's important that the First Amendment is so important to our democracy, because we need to be able to debate in a marketplace of ideas. And we can only do that if we are talking strictly about ideas and not attacking each other. So I would say that a policy like this, my gut reaction is this would have a chilling effect on the First Amendment. But I actually think, after reading it more carefully, I think this will allow us to have a more rigorous debate on ideas, while drawing a very clear boundary on what types of attacks, personal attacks, are unacceptable.
I think what I think of is, in our retreat earlier today, we looked at the CEE data, and a big area of opportunity for us is to look at the us versus them gap in our district. And if we think about what we observed in our previous board meeting in the public comment and how people chose to engage with their coworkers. I mean, let's be honest, these were their coworkers. That's the gap. And it would not be safe for anybody on that receiving end to even try to start having a conversation on that other side. And it's not safe emotionally, it's not safe professionally. And so I think of, if we wanted to move forward with this policy, I would encourage us to have our teacher unions, and our classified unions come to the table for a reading with it. I would encourage us to build it together and for embodying the language that we land on and whatever that policy looks like to be the focus so that we can close that us versus them. Because I think what we are navigating is that gap.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question about the two policies side by side, but Bill, you've been waiting to speak. Would you like to offer your thoughts?
Just a clarification, is this all a new policy? And where did you get the material to develop the policy?
So
WASDA sends out recommendations and then we can consider that. We can also draft new policy from scratch if we would like to, which we have done in the past with like our equity policy. So it's a template
draft.
Yeah, it's a WASDA draft that we can build from.
WASDA being the board's Washington
Association.
State School Board Directors Association.
And there were some changes made to this suggested policy. It was originally a civility policy, which had been approved by a previous board, a civility first viewpoint. But as Director Downs, who was on the board at the time, and myself as a community member at the time, had concerns about.
Oh no, I voted against it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I spoke out against it as a community member at the time about the chilling effect that can have on someone's First Amendment right and on forcing them to conform to structures of privilege. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't forcing someone to code switch, to change, to remove their passion from their speech. We just wanted to make sure that, and that's what the original did to some degree. So there were some changes made to it to remove that and to make sure it was focused on maintaining the dignity of all involved. But as Dr. Moshe said, this did come originally from WASDA.
And it
Director
also,
Downs.
Andrea, if I remember correctly, it was probably a year ago when you brought up professional standards and whether or not we needed professional standards in our daily operations. And at the time, I remember saying, I think we're okay. But your foresight is recognized. And
I wish it wasn't.
well, we live in a world where it seems that it may become more common. And we are an educational institution and we are to model for our young people. And I think it's really important that we are talking about this in a professional way, that we have standards of conduct that aren't, they're rooted in just that professional conduct, not anything else. And the expectation that we can come to a meeting and expect to be treated with at least a basic decorum is not an unreasonable expectation.
Go ahead.
I will add that in this policy draft, there's a little bit of language that I wonder about in terms of actions and behaviors that might provoke fear, anger, frustration, or alienation. I mean, I could say, I think Labradors are more intelligent than poodles, and that could provoke frustration from a poodle lover. So I just wonder, I don't actually think that. I think they're both brilliant. But you know, we might want to just look at the language and make sure that we aren't treading into tone policing. But I do believe that a lot of these guidelines are just about centering dignity, treating each other as equal subjects worthy of respect and care.
I would agree. I don't think we should keep this language per se. I think that we should model our district values. I think that we should bring union representatives to the table. I think we should hold a circle. I think we should set group norms for that circle. And I think we should go through and build this policy using a restorative practice. And I think that that's how it should be developed. That also means it's not going to be ready by the next board meeting, but I think that that's work that we should engage in and be thoughtful and mindful about the how.
Since students are affected by this as well, I'd love to see it if there are some students who are willing to participate in that as well.
We have two right here.
I don't want to step outside that bounds of.
Well, are you
assuming that.
asking for us to do a circle here with the board? Or are you saying that you're suggesting that what are you suggesting?
I think that we should hold a circle around what this policy should look like. And I think that we should have anybody who would be impacted by it be present for it. And it might be an opportunity that we reach out to somebody else to facilitate it and not have it internally facilitated. I would also say that I would be comfortable facilitating that. I don't know that I'm the best voice to do that, but I think that, and I think we also need to look at the timing, right? I don't know that right now is the best time, but maybe over the summer, looking at how we could facilitate that so that it's something that everybody has buy-in to, that everybody has, some connection with, so that when we are in those moments of frustration, because I think about, like, I've been in lots of meetings where I've called these clauses out and I've ended meetings, and some I've been able to steer through and regain that sense of decorum. As far as the board members go, I think I'm the most Xena warrior princess of the 5 of us, 7 of us. I don't know, Audrey, you might give me a run for my money, but I wouldn't feel comfortable stopping that meeting. And I'm usually the one who is the most comfortable. And so I think that there's that says something to the level of discomfort that it created. And so I think that they need to be part of what do we move forward doing.
So I think what I will do based on the board's conversation is send it ahead as in its current form, say that the board is considering some form of policy like this. And we need, we need everyone's buy-in, right? And input, and to expect more conversation around it. Because I do think what I'm hearing is the best way we can enforce a policy is if folks collectively engage in forming it, and then we can call out and say, hey, I think we're violating our own policy here.
Just like creating classroom norms with the students.
Right.
If you help build it, it's easier to buy in. Yeah.
Right. Effectively, it's the practice of sitting down together to create community agreements before launching into the topic of the meeting, which is, common practice.
I actually, we have at least one individual on our staff who has become quite capable of facilitating restorative circles. And I think he would be a good candidate to help us through this. So I think we can do this. I'm not sure the best timing, but between now and 5 weeks from now when graduation is not a good time.
No, we've got the June and July meetings, workshops in particular are quite busy. So I think it would come after.
And
August,
I think it
September.
really, it's something that as we go into the next school year would be an excellent launching point.
Yeah, this is definitely something I'd be willing to work on and take action in. Absolutely.
So I will not have this put on your next agenda. And no need for the current board
1400.
1400. You're not changing it or suggesting a change to it?
My guess is that once we get 5161 where we want it, we would then refer to 5161 in 1400.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to continue looking at them side by side and
So
seeing where we can collaborate language.
Okay, so far, the only one coming on to your business agenda is 3422. Okay, do you want me to move on?
Mr. Rose, did you have a comment? Go ahead.
This Rufus Rose again. I think this is a very important thing for you to reflect on very deeply. And I'm going to run through a list of things here that I wrote down while you were talking, but they are things that have been on my mind for years, including the past couple of years since I started coming back here. Nobody likes to be yelled at. I find that when I yell at my children, they don't hear me. When I yell at my wife, she doesn't hear me. And when they yell at me, I don't hear them either. And it makes me mad. And so something led up to that, some lack of talent on my part or their part that leads to the frustration when you just can't articulate your position and be heard. And being heard is very important. And there are clues that you have been heard and people give a damn about what you're saying. I think you should reflect as a board on how many people show up at your board meetings and why they aren't here. That's your responsibility in my mind. You have the duty to the public here to make people want to come here. They should enjoy coming to your board meetings because they gain something and they're given the opportunity to participate. That isn't happening very much. I know you think it is, but it isn't. There are plenty of examples on television and on social media of very responsible people in very high positions and very irresponsible people acting out all the time. It's a national problem. And it needs to be talked about. And what better place to talk about something like that than here at a Board of Education and with the students involved. The students need to hear these kind of conversations. You're debating a meet. I wasn't here. I looked it up on the recording and I saw the thing and the guy was a jerk. But he is also a responsible man. He was very frustrated because communications weren't working. And I got to tell you, I think that's your fault more than it is his fault. You have this elevated position and responsibility, and you've got to figure out ways to intercept that kind of behavior.
Just a second, I do want to note that in this course of this discussion, I do want to cut off descriptions of anyone as a jerk, because that is attacking a person rather than an action or an idea. I do want to just note that as we're discussing this, I want to practice myself of making sure that we're discussing actions, not people.
Well, I guess I'm a person, and I've been offended at this meeting in the past, not tonight. And it makes me want to shrink. And then it makes me want to say, damn it, I'm angry about that. And when I talk it out, as I did in that situation, where I think I was improperly addressed here by a board member, it was talked out afterward and it seemed to be okay. Unfortunately, the rest of the board didn't get to hear that conversation. So there's some way when that kind of thing happens that it really ought to be discussed broadly, I think. I sell a toy at the farmer's market. And there's a man who's a lecturer at the university, a PhD guy at the University of Washington, and we've become friends. And he came by the other day and talked to me about one of the athletic teams on the ferry that was vulgar in front of a lot of people. Now that they're not on campus, but that his attitude was, what a lousy school district. I mean, they were repeatedly vulgar in uniform. You need to know that if you don't know that kind of thing is happening, I don't know why you don't. You should know that kind of thing. And you should be ashamed of the students that behave that way, I think.
I would leave that discussion to the professionals engaged in it, the coach, the athletic director, the principal of that school as appropriate, because they are the professional educators and we are not. But I do think it is important for us to know about these things. I agree with that.
I really hope your views on that kind of thing are expressed to the principals if they haven't been. I don't know if you've.
I've said, expressed similar thoughts on that in these board meetings in the past. And I don't think that that comes as any surprise, me saying that I think that the experts should handle the situations as they come up.
What I would tell you on that matter, Mr. Rose, is that's the first I'm hearing of it. So if that occurred on the ferry and it was one of our sports teams in uniform and you found out, I would really appreciate it if you would ask that individual to either call me or send me an email and tell me what they saw, because I have no idea. And you're right, I am ashamed. That is unacceptable.
Is that the kind of thing that is, I don't know, for the principals, I'll ask you directly, is that the kind of thing you would discuss on your public address system to the whole student body?
Something we would address on our public address system?
I assume you have the ability to talk to
I
all.
would not get on our public announcements and talk about one team if there was an incident. I would be talking with that coach. I would be talking with that team. And I would also be talking with the person that made the complaint or saw something inappropriate with our kids.
I want to be
But
clear.
the first time I don't like it when it's the first time I hear something about our school and our kids in our uniforms, and you bring it up at a school board meeting instead of maybe Rufus giving me a call or emailing me that you heard something. I would appreciate that.
I do want to know.
I think your comment is appropriate, but I also wanted the entire board to hear it. See,
Mr. Rose,
this business
I think
of,
we veered from 5161. I
yeah,
think we
can we
need to
keep-
get back to
Thank you, Joy. I
5161.
agree.
Mr. Rose, if you have any more comments on these specific policies that we were discussing, we would welcome them. But I do want to keep it on that, on those topics, as workshops are intended to be around this. And I also want to note, my computer has run out of batteries. So if there are comments on the Zoom, someone else please mention them.
One thing for me first, before we move on. I do just want to offer that we as a board, part of our work is to offer implicit trust to our staff and administrators until and unless they prove that they cannot do the job that they have been hired for. They are the people who are at the front lines of teaching our kids and offering our kids a safe place to be and a safe place to learn. And so if I hear something that students have chosen to do, which happens, my first set of curiosities are to the person who is the direct supervisor of those kiddos. And then I move up the chain. So our trust as a board, because we're looking at it from up here, staff and administrators and coaches are down in their proletariat, right? They are doing the work. And so I have to give them my trust as a board member until and unless they prove that they have somehow breached that trust.
And I want to note that, thank you for saying that, but I do want to again note that we're straying off topic, and I'd like to get back to the policy. Bill, you had something on these policies.
Yeah, Bill Carruthers, just in defense of the public, I understand your discussion apparently was as employees, but the public was out of line as well. But I think we need to realize, if you don't, that one of the worst things people say they want to do is get up in public and talk. And when you have somebody from the public that has never been here before, or perhaps, then they're going to behave inappropriately in a lot of cases. But just consider that. I'm not defending anyone in this situation. I'm just letting you know, we need to understand that that's the way it happens with some folks.
Absolutely agree. And I also want to make sure that we're not making this about a single incident. This has been building in previous discussions and previous public comments, and that this is something I agree completely that we don't want to create a further chilling effect and further discourage people from commenting. And I think that's something that each of the board members has expressed a very direct concern with, and that we want to make sure that we're still encouraging comment, because we need to hear that comment.
Brooke, I'd like to expand on that. This is not just about the board. Joe, Dr. Moshe, you are correct. I have been bringing this up for a long time, and not because of the board, but because of knowing what teachers are engaging with in meetings that they're holding, knowing what emails they are receiving, understanding how some of our day-to-day operations are being impacted. And Ms. Phillips spoke to, it leading to burnout of people in the education force. It's not just teachers, it's paraeducators, it's front office staff. And a policy like this, I believe we're centering on a board conversation because it impacted us, right? And so we're focusing on our own experience. The reason I have been wanting to put something like this forward is so that when the person in the front office is on the phone and is getting verbally abused on the phone, that they have something that they can say, I can hang up the phone now. And I don't have to listen to this right now. And I don't have to absorb this. And so I want to challenge us as a board to think about this policy beyond this boardroom and to think about the person in the front office or the custodian who is cleaning up a lunchroom, and how this policy would empower them in that situation when they were to receive interactions that are less than professional.
And frankly, to point to an earlier example, it would support a coach in reminding their students about expected behavior.
Okay.
Moving on.
Moving on. What are we on to discipline next? Okay, so Director Green-Herron, I'm going to pass the majority of this over to you, but Director Green-Herron approached me about a month or two ago, wanting to take a stab at some policy development, and wanted to look at the student discipline policy and look at its alignment with our restorative practices and the work that we had done over the last few years. And so I wholeheartedly encourage that. And I'll let Director Green-Herron take away what changes he would be recommending.
Thanks. Yeah, so this is my first attempt at proposing policy changes. My goals were threefold. One, like you said, bring this policy in alignment with our culture of care and restorative justice. Two, clarify some of the requirements around the creation and the reporting of discipline and disparate discipline, use of discipline, and then also clarify the responsibilities and the feedback loop that the board needs to ensure that that we fulfill our obligation of partnering with the superintendent, whose job it is then to partner with her staff, or his or her their staff, to make sure that discipline is working for students. So some of the stuff in the intro is more about the first goal that I mentioned about making sure that it's understood that we're approaching discipline from an anti-bias lens and a culture of care. And then further down, there are some changes just that clarify words like where it's like unclear who has the responsibility to do something. So it'll say like the superintendent or their delegate will. There's some changes about reporting to the board. Oh yeah, this one's clarifying professional development. So the strikeout just had said something kind of vague about people will agree on professional development, and this makes it more clear that our expectation is that there's regular professional development, instructing staff on discipline, our chosen discipline policy. You'll note it doesn't very often specifically call out restorative justice specifically. I didn't want to couple it too closely to a specific practice. I felt that's more in the realm of a procedure. It calls out a grievance process, which is already written in 3241P. That's the procedure that goes with this policy. Just makes it clear that A, it exists, and B, that's more in the realm of procedure than policy. Yeah, limitations on the use of suspensions and expulsions. Some clarification on if and when law enforcement can be called, which is part of another policy, 3225. So it's really a last resort to involve law enforcement in a disciplinary action. Yeah, this section didn't have a header, so now it's clear that it's about accountability and data reporting to the board. Most of this is unchanged. There's already the policy is already pretty good, and it refers to the existing law. The main change is about reporting. Yeah, it's right there. So that WAC, it already mandates that the district does some internal assessment of the discipline policies and how it's being carried out. And so that paragraph just says, well, take what you're doing and present it to the board in such a way that it doesn't personally identify anybody, but that we can still see if certain subgroups are undergoing more discipline than would be statistically expected for a group of that size. And if so, what does the leadership team plan to do to sort of bring it more back in balance with what would be the statistically expected levels of discipline across different subgroups? And then the last one, if you scroll back up a little bit, it just, yeah, right there. It just says that if someone is responsible for implementing a discipline policy, their performance evaluation should be at least in part on their effectiveness at implementing that policy. So it's just the smallest amount of nudging without overly dictating how we expect Dr. Moshe to evaluate the performance of her employees.
First, oh, go ahead. You done?
That's it.
First off, I want to thank you, and thank you to Andrea for providing the guidance on that, but thank you for the hard work put in on this. I'd like to turn to our administrators and see how they think that this would affect them, because they would be the ones implementing this policy. See if they see immediate concerns, see if they think it would support them, if it would cause a great deal of additional work, or if it's work that's already being done.
It's May.
Sorry, that was a lot to ask in May.
Yeah, I'm downloading still and reading through it. And the clarity of the police, I need to deep dive into. And this one's hard now. I spend a lot of time collaborating with my colleagues on what I know and what we think is restorative versus punitive. And then a lot of the conversation around family of, well, what happened? Just suspended. It's like, well, what does that repair? So these conversations, there's so much teaching involved that I would need a little more time to digest and give really true and clear feedback. And yeah, we're on hour 14 in May. So
Could we maybe suggest, Dr. Moshe, that leadership team take a look at this before we bring it back for a second reading and give some thoughts?
Absolutely. I do want to point out that, for example, the disaggregation of data. I know that Mr. Patton does that on a regular basis. I also know that it's something we would put into the data summit once a year. So it's not that I'm thinking it's something we can't accomplish. Everything takes some thought and some time. So yeah, I'd appreciate that, we can certainly continue to look at this and bring it back at a different meeting. I don't have an answer right now. It's not that Director Greenherron and I haven't talked about the possibilities and what I'm thinking and what he's thinking and recommending. But it is May. And it's been quite a long day. So I don't want to give you an answer, but I certainly, we can look at it and see what it really means. We are using restorative practices. We have been doing some circles. Again, if we look at the number of times we actually suspend students, it's a handful of times a year. some of what we're trying to figure out as a complete staff, and we talked about with our culture of care team is, how would we talked about it with the entire staff at our last restorative training, was how would we do some tier 3? What would the resources look like for us to do that? How would we get staff trained? How many times a year do we think we might have to use a tier 3 restorative circle, which takes a huge amount of time to prepare for? And again, working with our staff to help understand that what we're looking for to restore harm is not, and I'm using a quote, it's not letting someone off the hook. It's in fact creating a situation where students identify what harm they did and what consequence may be appropriate to repair that harm. And I use consequence in a variety of ways. The best example I have was actually provided by a student, and it kind of goes back to what some of us may look at as discipline of old, in the sense of, if I put graffiti on the side of the school, it caused harm. My reparation for that harm may be cleaning that graffiti and helping the custodian and cleaning. Or if I've done damage to a bus seat, maybe I'm going to the bus garage and working with the mechanic to replace that seat and to understand the level of work I've created for that individual. So those are the things we're talking about, and you're never going to capture all of that in a policy.
And I would just offer to take a little bit of weight off of the team's shoulders. Joe and I talked about what he was hoping to add into here. And really what we wanted to do was quantify all the work you are already doing. So for example, the data reporting, he and I had a conversation about where that does come out and how that happens. And so I don't read this. And when I kind of did the precursory read through it, I don't see it as adding anything.
Right.
I see it as quantifying what you're already doing so that, Joe, when you do retire in 2 years and you move on and as other members of this team shift and change, that the intention and the work that you have been creating becomes embedded in the culture.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think we're on the right track, but I do appreciate the time.
So I would like to suggest that Dr. Moshe and I discuss later at one of our scheduling meetings, bringing this back up at a later date once we can get input from the administrators.
Did you have anything else you wanted to add with it, Director Greenhair?
No, unless anyone else has comments.
I just want to thank Director Greenhair for taking such an interest and proactive stance on making a stronger policy, something that needs to be looked at and improved. And I hope that we can take a nod from the Washington State House of Representatives, and if his policy proposals get passed, if we can all stop and congratulate him. I really like that tradition.
I was just thinking that, great minds.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that.
Okay. Teacher assistance program. This one is the one that's
Retiring,
yes.
no longer applicable. So the board would have to vote to abandon this policy.
In the
I'll have to-
interest of time, can someone give one sentence on why it's no longer applicable?
Because OSPI doesn't require what this is telling us to do. And so we have provided teacher mentors and so on when we have new teachers, but this is specifically saying that it's through the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction.
We'll have to look up how we remove.
And there was a
policy.
state grant that supported that, and it no longer exists. Would be an unfunded mandate.
I'll just say I'm really sad that this program is ending. It's been a huge part of my career for a long time, and that's sad.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm sure some people are happy they don't have to do it anymore. Okay, next one we got distribution of information. No real substantive changes. We're just minimizing words.
And we actually do this materials that are distributed have to be approved. There's also peach jar that people can put things through, but they're once again approved. So it's about making sure that we don't use our limited or our captive audience.
And then
That's it.
that's it.
Okay. Then the board is about to adjourn. We will move to executive session to review the performance of a public employee. This workshop is adjourned. Thank you very much. It will take no longer than 1 hour.